The Charger hummed low as Solomon Dryden guided it off the highway and into the cracked asphalt lot of Elmridge High. He had driven 8 hours straight, stopping only for gas and coffee, each mile rolling beneath him like a reminder of the promise he carried. He could have flown, sure, one quick ticket, 2 hours in the air. But flying didn't feel right. The Charger was his wife's car, and though she'd been gone 2 years now, he still felt closer to her when he drove it. The sound of the engine, the weight of the wheel, even the faint scent of the worn leather, those things kept her near. The school looked like every other small-town Texas high school he had seen in his years of service: weathered red brick, a pair of flagpoles in front, and kids loitering near the gym doors in their caps and gowns. Some smoked behind the dumpsters, trying not to get caught. Others clutched balloons and signs, laughter rising in short bursts that carried across the lot. Parents hurried with cameras, bouquets, and folding chairs, as if the ceremony weren't already crowded enough. Solomon eased the car into a spot by the chain-link fence. The lot was nearly full, rows of sedans and pickups glinting under the early evening sun. He shut the engine off and sat for a moment, letting the silence settle. His hand drifted to the glove compartment. Inside was a photograph, creased, worn, with one corner nearly torn through. His wife, Alicia, sat in the hospital bed holding their newborn son, Tyron. Her smile was tired but radiant, the kind that carried both exhaustion and triumph. He touched the edge of the photo, tracing the faded lines. "I promised you," he murmured. His voice was low, nearly swallowed by the hum of cicadas outside. "I wouldn't miss it." He slipped the photo into the inner pocket of his marine dress blues. The uniform fit him like armor, dark blue coat pressed sharp, brass buttons gleaming, trousers with the crimson stripe down the side. His boots had been polished until they caught the sunlight in flashes. Not because he wanted to show off, but because there were things in life you didn't do halfway. Presentation mattered. It always had. Stepping out, he adjusted his cover, the white cap crisp against his dark skin. He walked with measured steps toward the gym, posture straight, shoulders squared. Even here, among balloon strings and chatter, he carried himself like a Marine. It wasn't performance. It was simply who he was. The closer he came to the doors, the thicker the crowd became. Siblings with painted signs jostled for space. A grandmother leaned heavy on a walker, her daughter steadying her arm. A father clutched a bouquet too tightly, petals already wilting in the heat. Solomon took it all in quietly, breathing deep. Pride and ache filled his chest in equal measure, pride for the boy he was about to watch step into adulthood, ache for the woman who should have been standing beside him. Inside, the gym was already packed. Folding chairs filled the floor in perfect rows, while the bleachers sagged with the weight of parents and cousins. The air smelled faintly of concession popcorn and industrial floor wax. It was alive with sound, chatter, scraping chairs, the occasional too loud laugh. Solomon moved through it all, steady as a stone in a river. At the door, a volunteer with a headset and clipboard glanced at his printed ticket. The man's eyes flicked up at the uniform, then down again quickly. He nodded, gesturing toward the third row on the left. "You're good. Family seating up front." "Appreciate it," Solomon said, his voice even. He passed through without hesitation. The seat was plastic and wobbly, but he adjusted it without complaint. From here, he could see the stage clearly, banners strung high in silver letters, Class of 2024. School board members gathered near the podium, shuffling notes, adjusting microphones. Beyond them, at the far end of the gym, the graduates lined up in black robes, caps tilted, cords draped across shoulders. Solomon's eyes searched the rows until he found him, Tyron, tall and lanky, the same calm focus in his eyes that Alicia used to carry. 18 years. Just like that. Solomon remembered the night Tyron was born, when he himself had flown in from Okinawa with dirt still under his fingernails, barely 4 days of leave to spare. He had held his son, eyes heavy from travel and combat drills, and thought, this is the real mission. That memory lived under his ribs, sharp as ever. He sat still now, hands resting on his thighs, every muscle relaxed yet braced. He wasn't blinking much, didn't want to miss a second. Around him, families rustled programs, waved across the gym, fiddled with cameras. Solomon ignored all of it. His focus narrowed to the boy in the black robe, the stage, and the weight of the photo pressing against his chest. The music began, pomp and circumstance. The crowd rose to their feet. Solomon rose too, shoulders squared. The graduates filed in, a river of black and silver, laughter mixing with nerves. Then came the anthem. Hands over hearts all around. Solomon didn't move. He didn't need to. His whole presence was the salute. As the last note faded, he thought again of Alicia, how she would have cried through the entire ceremony, how she would have fussed over Tyron's tie until he begged her to stop. He felt her absence like a shadow at his side. Still, he stood rooted, a man built from years of discipline, grief, and love, waiting for the moment his son's name would be called. And though he didn't yet know it, the evening was about to turn. What began as a promise kept would soon become something larger, something that no one in that gym would ever forget. The ceremony hadn't yet begun when Solomon eased back into the plastic chair marked for family section. He set his cap on his lap and let his gaze sweep across the crowd. The bleachers groaned as latecomers climbed to the top rows. Toddlers squirmed, phones flashed, and the hum of voices rose until the principal tapped the microphone to hush them. Solomon didn't mind the noise. Crowds never unsettled him. He had walked patrols in Kandahar where the air itself felt hostile, every doorway a potential threat. A high school gym buzzing with excitement was nothing compared to that. The seat was close enough to the stage that he could see Tyron's profile from where the graduates waited. His boy was shifting from foot to foot, tall and straight, but Solomon recognized the nerves in the way his hands twisted the edge of his gown. He smiled softly. Tyron had Alicia's hands, long, graceful fingers. Musician's hands. That thought made his chest tighten. A shadow fell over him. "Sir," a voice said. Solomon glanced up to see two men in security polos standing over him. Both were younger, their faces pink from the heat. One had a radio clipped to his belt, the cord snaking up to an earpiece. The other carried nothing but folded arms and a frown. Their names were stitched onto their shirts in white thread, Mally and Garvin. "Evening," Solomon said evenly. Mally, the one with the radio, nodded toward the chair. "This section's full, sir. We're going to need you to move to the back bleachers." Solomon reached calmly into his coat pocket and unfolded his ticket. The volunteer at the door had already checked it, but he offered it again, holding it steady so Mally could read. "Row 3, Seat 7. Family section." Mally glanced at it, then exchanged a look with Garvin. His mouth tightened. "Yeah, but we've got some adjustments. Overflow's heavy tonight. We need these rows for certain families." "Certain families," Garvin echoed, his tone sharper. His gaze didn't linger on the ticket at all. It lingered on Solomon's skin, his uniform, his stillness. Solomon said nothing. He only folded the ticket back into his pocket. His silence seemed to irritate Garvin. "Sir, I don't think you heard him. You need to move." "I heard," Solomon replied. His voice was calm, almost quiet. He kept his eyes fixed on the stage where the faculty were arranging their papers. He didn't shift in his seat. Didn't look at the guards again. His stillness was its own reply. Around them, the murmurs began. Parents nearby leaned in, pretending to look at programs while their ears angled toward the exchange. A woman with a camera whispered to her husband, "He's got a ticket, I saw him show it." But Mally pressed on. "Look, sir, don't make this hard. We can escort you ourselves if you won't cooperate." "Escort." The word landed like a challenge, though Solomon didn't move. He had heard it before in other places, from men who thought authority came from posture and a uniform they barely earned. He remembered checkpoints in Helmand where villagers were herded by nervous teenagers with rifles too heavy for their shoulders. He remembered keeping his own Marines calm when fear made them reckless. And he remembered his rule, never rise to noise. He folded his hands over his cap. His back straightened, though his eyes never left the stage. "I'm fine right here," he said. The guard stiffened. Garvin's jaw flexed, his voice louder now. "This isn't optional, old man." The whispering grew louder. Phones tilted. Someone near the aisle already had their camera raised, red light blinking. Solomon still didn't move. He thought of Tyron, waiting in line to walk the stage. If he stood now, if he argued, his son would see it. He would remember his father as the man who disrupted his graduation. That wasn't the memory Solomon meant to leave behind. No, his promise wasn't just to be present, but to show Tyron what dignity looked like when tested. The gym seemed to shrink. The sound of laughter in the bleachers dimmed, replaced by a rising tension that spread row by row. Even the graduates were beginning to glance toward the commotion. Tyron's eyes flicked briefly across the gym, searching for his father. Their gaze met for a second, just enough. Solomon gave the faintest nod. Then he returned his eyes to the stage, hand steady, posture unbroken. Mally shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to silence as resistance. Men usually argued, raised their voices, caused scenes. But this man, this Marine, refused to move without ever lifting his voice. Garvin leaned closer, his voice dropping but edged with threat. "Don't think that uniform means you get special treatment. You're not in charge here." Solomon exhaled slowly, almost a sigh. "Never said I was." The words were soft, almost lost under the crowd. But the weight of them settled heavy between the three men. The ceremony lights brightened, the principal cleared his throat at the microphone, and the band struck the first notes of another march. But in row 3, seat 7, the quiet battle had begun. And somewhere in the back of the gym, unseen for now, 6 men who knew Solomon from another life shifted in their seats. They had noticed too. The first names were being read from the stage, but row 3 had already become its own battleground. The crowd clapped politely for each graduate, yet their eyes kept darting sideways toward the Marine who refused to move. What should have been an ordinary ceremony now carried a low hum of unease. Mally adjusted the cord in his earpiece, glancing toward the other end of the gym as though waiting for a signal. Garvin stayed planted, arms stiff, jaw tight. His voice dropped, but the bite remained. "You can make this easy, sir. We don't want a scene." Solomon didn't even glance at him. His eyes stayed forward, fixed on the podium where the superintendent fumbled with a stack of papers. His face was calm, jaw relaxed, shoulders loose. Only the steady grip on his cap betrayed the quiet pressure beneath the surface. "You've already made it a scene," he murmured. The words were low, yet they cut through Garvin's forced authority like a blade. A woman 2 rows back gave a soft om-hom under her breath. Another parent raised her phone higher, the small red light glowing steady. Mally shifted, clearing his throat. "This section's reserved for families," Solomon interrupted gently. His first true interruption, but spoken without heat. "That's what I am." Garvin leaned closer, his shadow falling across Solomon's lap. "I don't care what you are. You're moving." The air in the gym shifted. Whispers spread like wind through tall grass. People craned necks, nudged elbows, held their breath. Even the band members on the sideline glanced over their music sheets, notes faltering for half a bar before recovering. Still Solomon didn't rise. Didn't argue. He simply remained, a mountain unmoved, carved from silence. And in that silence, his mind slipped, backward, away from the suffocating gym, back to the desert. Afghanistan, years earlier. Heat shimmered across the Kandahar Valley. The convoy had stalled, one Humvee disabled by an IED. Smoke curled from the wreckage, and Garvin, no, not Garvin, another young soldier whose name still burned in Solomon's memory, was bleeding out in the dust. His squad panicked, voices shouting over radios, hands trembling on rifles. Solomon had walked straight into the blast zone, calm as stone. No yelling, no wasted motion. Just a firm command, "Cover me." And they had. They always did. Because his steadiness gave them something to anchor to when chaos raged. He remembered dragging the boy out, remembered Creed Marston's hand clutching his arm, eyes wide with gratitude. He had been calm then. He would be calm now. Back in the gym, Garvin's patience snapped. "All right, that's it," he hissed. He reached down, hand brushing Solomon's armrest as though to grip his elbow. A single cough echoed from the bleachers. Then another. Not real coughs, deliberate, rhythmic. Solomon's eyes flicked, just slightly, toward the sound. Row by row, subtle movement stirred. 6 men, scattered through the gym, sat straighter. They weren't in uniform now, civilian shirts, jackets, jeans. To anyone else, they looked like ordinary fathers, uncles, alumni. But Solomon knew them. He recognized the posture, the eyes that never stopped scanning. The quiet readiness of men who had spent their lives watching the angles. Brothers. They didn't rise. Not yet. But their presence pressed against the room like a tide beginning to swell. And though no words were spoken, Solomon felt the old bond thrumming in his chest. Garvin hadn't noticed. He was too close, too intent on forcing the Marine to bend. "Get up," he said, louder this time, enough for heads to turn all across the gym. Solomon's hands tightened around his cap. He inhaled slowly, controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried farther than before, but it was still calm, still measured. "My son is about to walk that stage. I will not move." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. A hush fell, rolling outward like ripples in a pond. Even the principal on stage glanced up, startled by the sudden quiet. Mally swallowed hard. He looked at Garvin, uncertain now. He could feel the room turning against them, the stares, the whispers, the recording phones. But Garvin's pride wouldn't release its grip. His hand hovered again, fingers twitching near Solomon's shoulder. And from the back corner, one of the 6 men finally stood. Creed Marston. The SEAL who owed Solomon his life. He didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make 3 rows of spectators straighten, sensing the shift. The storm was no longer brewing. It had arrived. Creed Marston didn't rush. He stood slowly, deliberately, as though his body had been waiting for this exact moment. His jacket shifted, revealing the squared shoulders of a man who had carried more weight than most would ever know. 3 rows behind him, another man rose. Then another. Like a silent signal had passed among them, invisible but undeniable. 6 in all. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't even look at the guards directly. They just stood, arms folded or hands at their sides, eyes locked on the Marine seated in row 3. A silent wall forming, one piece at a time. The gym noticed. It could not. Conversations sputtered out mid-sentence. Clapping for the names on stage faltered. Heads turned as the presence of the 6 men settled across the room. You didn't have to know what a Navy SEAL was to understand the weight of their silence. Authority radiated from them like heat off asphalt. Garvin froze mid-motion, hand inches from Solomon's armrest. His eyes darted toward the men standing, confusion flickering. "What the hell?" Creed finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Don't put your hands on him." The sound of it was steady, flat, but layered with command. The kind of voice men instinctively listen to, whether on a battlefield or in a crowded gym. Mally shifted uneasily. "Who are you supposed to be?" Creed's eyes didn't waver. "Someone who knows exactly who that man is. More than you ever will." Solomon still hadn't moved. He sat as he had from the beginning, straight-backed, calm, hands folded over his cap. His face betrayed nothing, but inside, memory churned. Kandahar, years earlier. The sky had been orange with dust and fire. Creed was pinned behind a half-toppled wall, bullets snapping against stone. He thought it was over, that he'd bleed out in the sand, another name whispered into the radio. Then Solomon had appeared. Not running. Not frantic. Walking. Calm as a man strolling across a church aisle. He had pulled Creed out without a word, set him on his feet, and pointed back toward cover. That was it. No dramatics. No speeches. Just presence. The kind that steadied every man within reach. From that day, Creed knew, this Marine wasn't ordinary. He was a pillar. And when pillars stood, walls held. Back in the gym, the other SEALs spread slightly, each one occupying his space like a marker laid on the board. Parents glanced nervously between them, recognizing something they couldn't quite name. Even Tyron, waiting in line with his classmates, craned his neck. His eyes locked on the row where his father sat, then flicked toward the men rising in silent defense. Confusion flickered into pride. Garvin's jaw worked, but no words came. His bravado had faltered. Authority slipped from his grasp the way sand runs through fingers. Mally tried again, weaker this time. This isn't necessary. Everyone just sit down so we can get on with it. But no one moved. Creed stepped closer, slow and unhurried. His boots echoed faintly against the polished gym floor. He stopped just short of Garvin, leaving space, but filling it with unspoken weight. You think this man doesn't belong? Creed asked quietly. He tilted his chin toward Solomon. He's the reason half of us are standing here breathing. He's earned that seat 100 times over. Garvin muttered, this isn't Afghanistan. This is a high school gym. Creed's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Respect travels. The words landed heavy. Even the principal on stage hesitated, lowering his notes, watching the exchange. Teachers shifted awkwardly, sensing the ceremony had slipped beyond their control. The 6 SEALs remained upright, unmoving, their silence as loud as any shout. They didn't need to flex muscle. The room already understood, if one Marine sat, 6 SEALs would stand. And Solomon. Solomon simply breathed. He had lived his life being tested, prodded, underestimated. He had been told to move aside in ways louder, harsher, more dangerous than this. But never had his refusal been answered with such a visible wall of loyalty. He felt it like a current flowing through him, like Alicia's hand on his shoulder, like Tyron's heartbeat echoing his own. He didn't nod. Didn't smile. He stayed still. Because dignity wasn't about rising. It was about not needing to. The tension hung thick, ready to snap. Garvin's pride, Mally's uncertainty, the SEAL's silence, the crowd's anticipation, it all converged into a single fragile moment. And on the stage, the principal cleared his throat again, voice trembling slightly as he leaned into the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, let's continue with our ceremony. But no one in that gym was looking at the stage anymore. All eyes were locked on row 3. On the man who sat. And on the 6 shadows who stood for him. Garvin's hand twitched at his side, the urge to grab Solomon gnawing at his pride. He wasn't used to being ignored. In bars, in parking lots, in the small town where he worked weekend shifts, people usually flinched when his voice went sharp. But here, before the eyes of hundreds, his authority was slipping like water through clenched fists. The 6 men standing across the gym made sure of that. Their stillness had weight, their silence louder than any order he could bark. It wasn't just defiance, it was recognition. They stood for Solomon, not him. And Garvin hated the way that made him feel small. Mally shifted uneasily beside him. His eyes darted to the bleachers where parents recorded every second, red lights glowing. He muttered under his breath, "Man, let it go." But Garvin wasn't listening. His jaw was tight, teeth grinding. He bent slightly toward Solomon, voice pitched low but sharp as a blade. "Last chance, old man. Get up before I put you up." The words slithered into the tense quiet, drawing gasps from nearby rows. The hush spread outward, swallowing even the names echoing from the stage. Tyron's classmate had just walked across, but barely a handful of parents clapped. Everyone was waiting, breath held. Solomon turned his head at last. Slowly. His eyes met Garvin's, steady and unblinking. His voice was calm, level, almost soft. You don't have that power. Something in those words, maybe their certainty, maybe their ease, struck deeper than a shout ever could. Garvin's face flushed red, his pride screaming louder than his reason. He shifted his weight forward, ready to lay a hand on the Marine. And that's when Creed moved. The SEAL closed the distance in 3 long strides, each step echoing on the gym floor. He didn't shove. He didn't raise his fists. He simply placed himself between Garvin and Solomon, his stance loose but his presence undeniable. You're done, Creed said. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut clean through the silence. You don't put your hands on that man. Garvin stiffened. He opened his mouth, but the words caught when the other 5 SEALs shifted forward too. Not rushing. Not threatening. Just moving closer in silent unity. One of them, a tall man with scars cutting across his jaw, spoke for the first time. His voice was gravel, worn but steady. You lay one finger on him, and you'll answer to all of us. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not yet, but in whispers and murmurs, a current of electricity snapping through the gym. Phones rose higher. Even the teachers on stage leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of the storm. Garvin glanced around, realizing with a jolt that the tide had shifted entirely. No one was with him. Not the crowd. Not Mally, who now looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Not even the principal, whose pale face signaled he was desperate to de-escalate. And yet, pride clawed at Garvin's chest, demanding one last stand. This is my job, he barked, louder now, voice cracking under the strain. Creed didn't flinch. He leaned in just enough that Garvin had to tilt his chin upward to meet his eyes. Your job is to keep order. You're out of your depth. Stand down. The words weren't shouted, but they landed like a command on a battlefield. For a long moment, Garvin teetered there, fists clenching, breath sharp. Then the weight of 100 watching eyes broke him. He stepped back, muttering curses under his breath. His face burned crimson, but his arms dropped to his sides. Mally exhaled in visible relief. We're done here, he said quickly, tugging Garvin's sleeve. Come on. The 2 guards withdrew, their retreat met with a ripple of hushed applause from the bleachers. It wasn't loud, just enough for the message to carry. The room knew who had won. Solomon hadn't moved through any of it. He remained seated, posture straight, eyes forward, the same stillness that had carried him through firefights and funerals alike. Creed glanced down at him, gave a faint nod, and returned to his place. The other SEALs followed, resuming their silent watch. On stage, the principal fumbled for words at the microphone, his voice shaky. Let's continue with the ceremony. The band picked up the processional again, though their instruments wavered as the players stole glances toward row 3. The moment had passed, but the room wasn't the same. Every person in that gym had witnessed it, the silent clash, the invisible line drawn and held. And Tyron, standing in line with his classmates, felt his chest swell until it nearly hurt. His father had faced down humiliation, not with fists or fury, but with unshakable dignity. And when the world tried to push him aside, 6 men who owed him their lives had risen to ensure he remained. The lesson etched itself into Tyron's bones before he even set foot on the stage. The line of graduates inched forward, gowns swishing against polished gym floors, tassels swinging with nervous energy. Most of the seniors whispered jokes, fiddled with their name cards, or tugged at caps that never sat quite right. But Tyron Dryden wasn't hearing any of it. His ears were full of something else, the echoes of silence. The kind that had filled the gym when the guards hovered over his father. The kind that had cracked when those 6 men rose, unspoken but unbreakable. He kept glancing sideways, pretending to check how far the line had moved, but his eyes kept straying toward the 3rd row on the left. There, his father still sat, unmoved, unshaken, like the chair itself had been built around him. 2 guards had walked away, 6 warriors had risen, and still his father sat like a mountain that refused erosion. Tyron's palms sweated against the thin fabric of his gown. His chest felt tight, not from nerves about walking across the stage, but from the storm inside him. For 18 years, Solomon Dryden had been Dad, the man who fixed his bike chain, grilled burgers in the backyard, reminded him to iron his shirt before church. But in the space of 20 minutes, Tyron realized Dad was more than that. Dad was a Marine who carried silence like armor. Dad was a man others followed into fire. Dad was the kind of presence that could stop a room with nothing more than stillness. The girl ahead of him turned, her braids swinging across her shoulder. "You ready?" she whispered nervously, offering a shaky smile. Tyron managed a half smile. "More than you know." The announcer called another name. A burst of applause, polite but distracted. Tyron's stomach clenched. One more student, then it would be him. Across the gym, Solomon leaned slightly forward, the only movement he'd made in nearly half an hour. His eyes locked onto his son with the same focus he once gave to desert horizons and unseen threats. Tyron felt the weight of that gaze. It didn't press him down, it lifted him. The announcer cleared her throat, adjusted the microphone, and spoke his name with deliberate weight. Tyron Dryden. For half a heartbeat, the world paused. Then the gym erupted. Applause cracked like thunder. Cheers rang out from every corner. But what struck hardest wasn't the volume, it was the rhythm. 6 men, scattered across the gym, raised their hands and clapped in perfect unison. Each strike of palm against palm was sharp, deliberate, coordinated. It wasn't celebration, it was honor. A salute without the formality. A language spoken only between warriors, yet understood by everyone watching. Tyron straightened his spine. His legs no longer felt shaky. He walked across the stage slowly, each step grounded, steady, deliberate, as though the moment demanded reverence. The principal extended the diploma folder with a hand that still trembled faintly from earlier tension. Tyron accepted it, shook her hand firmly, and turned toward the audience. His eyes scanned, searching, ignoring the blur of faces, until he found the only one that mattered. Solomon Dryden sat in the 3rd row, still in uniform, still unflinching. But in that moment, he let a smile slip through. Small, barely there, but enough. And Tyron understood. That smile held everything: pride, relief, and a love that didn't need to be spoken to be real. Tyron gave the faintest nod, returning the silent exchange. Father and son, bound by something deeper than applause or ceremony. The crowd continued cheering as Tyron stepped off the stage, but the sound no longer mattered. What mattered was the connection sealed in that glance. What mattered was that his father had been there, had stayed, and had been honored in a way no security guard could ever erase. Back in the line of seated graduates, Tyron gripped his diploma tighter than he needed to. His classmates patted his back, some congratulating, others still buzzing about the earlier confrontation. But Tyron barely heard them. He was somewhere else, standing in the echo of what he'd just witnessed. Across the gym, the 6 SEALs hadn't sat back down. They remained upright, arms crossed, scanning the room with the casual precision of men who knew when to hold their ground. Their presence wasn't aggressive. It was simply a reminder: Solomon Dryden was never alone. The ceremony pushed forward. More names called, more cheers. But from that moment on, the energy of the room had shifted. Every graduate who followed Tyron walked across in the shadow of what had just happened. Parents clapped harder, siblings screamed louder, and even the band seemed to play with a little more force, as though the air itself had been cleared of pretense. Yet Solomon sat as he always had, still, composed, eyes forward. He didn't clap for every name, not because he didn't care, but because his focus never wavered from the boy with his wife's eyes, the boy who had just become a man in front of the entire town. For Tyron, the ceremony blurred after that. The names, the speeches, the caps tossed in the air, he'd remember them faintly. But what would etch itself permanently into his memory was that walk, that applause, and the knowledge that his father's quiet dignity had been louder than any insult or attempt to push him aside. By the time the last graduate walked the stage, Tyrant understood something he hadn't when the day began. Graduation wasn't just about crossing a stage. It was about carrying a name with honor, about understanding the weight of the shoulders you stood on. And his father's shoulders, though scarred and weary, were stronger than anything he could have imagined. The ceremony ended in a storm of cheers, mortarboards arcing into the air, tassels flying like confetti. Graduates rushed into clumps, hugging, laughing, shouting into cell phones. The band played a triumphant tune, parents surged toward the gym floor, and teachers beamed as though the chaos was all part of the plan. But for Tyron, the sound fell into the background. He had only one direction in mind. He moved through the crowd with purpose, weaving between hugs and selfies, until he reached row 3. His father still sat there, cap in his lap, posture straight, uniform crisp despite the hours. The seals lingered nearby like shadows, still watchful, though their expressions softened now that the storm had passed. For a moment, Tyron just stood there, diploma in hand, staring. The words he'd planned, about pride, about thanks, about how glad he was his father had come, jammed in his throat. All he could manage was a quiet, "Dad." Solomon looked up, meeting his son's eyes. And then, finally, he stood. Slowly, deliberately, his frame rising as though the years of service still clung to his bones. The two faced each other in the middle of the gym, father and son, Marine and graduate. "You walked proud," Solomon said simply. His voice was low, steady, carrying more weight than any applause could. Tyron swallowed hard. "I only did it because you showed me how." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Solomon placed a hand on his son's shoulder, heavy but gentle, the same way he had steadied countless soldiers in the field. "Life's going to test you," Solomon said. "People will tell you where you don't belong. They'll try to move you, break you, make you small. You don't fight every battle with fists. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay seated. And when you've earned respect, son, others will stand for you." The words sank deep, settling into Tyron like stone into foundation. He thought of the guards, red-faced and blustering. He thought of the 6 seals, silent but immovable. And he thought of his father, unshaken through it all. "I'll remember," Tyron said, his voice rough with emotion. Solomon gave the faintest nod. "That's all I ask." From behind them, Creed stepped forward. He clapped Solomon on the back with the ease of a man who had once trusted him with his life. "Good to see you still teaching, old man." His grin softened as he turned to Tyron. "You've got a name worth carrying, son. Wear it well." The other seals murmured their congratulations too, short, simple, but each one sincere. Then, as quietly as they had risen, they began to drift away into the crowd, disappearing like shadows fading with the sun. They hadn't come for recognition. They had come because loyalty demanded it. Tyron watched them go, realizing just how much his father meant to these men. It wasn't medals, or speeches, or history books that held their respect. It was something invisible, etched only into memory and bond. Alicia appeared then, her heels clicking against the gym floor, eyes bright with tears she hadn't let fall earlier. She wrapped her arms around her son, pressing his cap askew. "My baby boy," she whispered, though her voice trembled with pride more than sadness. Tyron laughed softly, hugging her back. But when she pulled away, he glanced once more at his father. For the first time that day, Solomon's shoulders eased, the rigid line of his posture softening. His eyes glistened faintly, though his voice stayed strong. "You've crossed your first stage, Tyron. There'll be bigger ones. Harder ones. But you'll walk them the same way, straight-backed, steady, and proud." Tyron tightened his grip on his diploma, as though anchoring those words into himself. "Because I'm your son." Solomon allowed a rare smile, full and unguarded. "That's right." The family stood together then, 3 figures amid the swirl of chaos, the Marine who had never bent, the woman who had never doubted, and the young man who had just stepped into his own strength. Around them, the gym buzzed with laughter, photos, and plans for parties. But for Tyron, the world had narrowed to this: his father's lesson, his mother's pride, and the knowledge that some moments never leave you. The graduation had given him a diploma. His father had given him something greater, a way to stand in the world. And in the silence that lingered after the cheers faded, Tyron Dryden made himself a promise. Whatever battles came, whether in classrooms, in boardrooms, or in life's harsher arenas, he would face them with the same dignity his father had shown. Unmoved, unbroken, unafraid. Because sometimes, the loudest victory was the quietest stand.